Honestly, Commander Vance, your species' penchant for enthusiastic bluster is almost charming, in a primitive sort of way. Almost. Ambassador Lyra Vane of Xylos let the words hang in the sterile air of the Ethelgard Citadel briefing room, her voice a silken cut. Her gaze, the color of glacial ice, swept over Kaelin Vance, lingering just long enough to convey utter disdain. Could one species truly be so loud? This was their daily dance. Kaelin, representing the relatively young Terran Federation, and Lyra, the very image of Xylosian ancient refinement, a civilization that had been charting star clusters when humans were, as she'd once so delicately put it, aspiring to opposable thumbs. Xylosian arrogance. It was a galactic constant, Kaelin figured. But Lyra Vane. She'd weaponized it. Turned it into an art form. Every perfectly enunciated syllable, every subtle twitch of her iridescent head crests, screamed of their self-proclaimed superior intellect. And humans? Oh, they were just the brutish upstarts, useful for their raw determination, their uncanny human resilience in a fight, but ultimately, lacking. It was infuriating. Utterly. Especially when he remembered the Kylar Wars. The Kylar Wars. Funny how Xylosian historical archives tended to gloss over the details of that particular conflict. Specifically, the part where Terran fleets, bleeding ships and lives, had held the line at the siege of Cygnus Prime, preventing the Kylar swarm from overrunning 3 Xylosian core worlds. Worlds like Lyra's own pristine, shimmering Xylos. Did they ever acknowledge that? Rarely. And never with any real gratitude. Today, the topic was resource allocation in the newly charted nebula ASX-7. Lyra argued for Xylosian primary access, citing their advanced extraction technologies and, implicitly, their inherent right. Kaelin countered with the Federation's pioneering survey work and the principle of equitable distribution. Standard diplomatic sparring. Until Lyra, with a dismissive wave of a slender, 3-fingered hand, said, "Commander, your people's sacrifices are noted in the historical addenda. But current capability, not past sentimentality, dictates resource priority." Surely even a human can grasp that. The room, filled with delegates from a dozen species, went quiet. The air crackled. Kaelin felt the blood rush to his face. Sentimentality, Ambassador. He kept his voice level, a dangerous calm settling over him. Was it sentimentality when Terran Marines broke the Kylar siege lines at Cygnus Prime? When we towed 3 of your crippled colony ships out of the debris field, their shields failing, their people gasping for air? For a heartbeat, Lyra Vane looked something other than imperious. Her hand, unseen by most, drifted to her throat, fingers briefly brushing a small, flat object hidden beneath the high collar of her shimmering diplomatic robes, her star-shard amulet, a Xylosian relic of deep significance. A flicker, so fast Kaelin almost missed it, crossed her features. Pain. Regret. Or just annoyance at being reminded. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar icy mask. A commendable display of tactical expediency, Commander, she conceded, her tone dripping condescension. Your species excels at such brute force maneuvers. One might even say it's your primary evolutionary function. Now, if we could return to matters requiring actual intellect. That was it. The breaking point. The thinly veiled insult, dismissing millennia of human progress, courage, and sacrifice as mere brute force. How many times had he endured this? How many times had Earth's contributions been belittled, their diplomats treated like overeager children at the adults' table? Kaelin didn't speak. He simply nodded, a tight, almost imperceptible movement. He turned on his heel and walked out of the briefing room, the murmur of resumed conversation at his back. The Xylosian arrogance, Lyra Vane's in particular, was a disease. And diseases needed a cure. Or at least, a very harsh lesson. He walked, not seeing the intricate, glowing architecture of the Ethelgard citadel, a marvel of interspecies engineering. His mind was a galaxy away, a cold, hard knot of fury in his chest. Primitive brutes, are we? Playing at civilization. Lyra's past barbs echoed in his memory. She wants to talk about primitive. A dangerous idea began to coalesce, sharp and glittering like a shard of ice. Oh, Ambassador, he thought, a humorless smile touching his lips, I'll show you primitive. I'll show you exactly what a brute force maneuver looks like. He reached his Spartan quarters overlooking the citadel's main transit ring, the star-dusted void stretching beyond. The view, usually a source of quiet awe, now seemed to reflect the cold emptiness of his resolve. His fingers danced across his personal console, bypassing official channels, accessing restricted personnel files, cross-referencing remote, undesirable diplomatic postings. A revenge plot, intricate and deeply satisfying, began to take shape. Yes, this would do nicely. This would be very educational. For both of them. His fingers, still alive with the phantom energy of that last, infuriating confrontation, danced across his console. The citadel's star-dusted view was a cold comfort. Kalen Vance wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for a crucible. And then it appeared, a dossier flickering onto the main screen. Outpost Sigma 7. Perfect. A grim smile touched his lips, a truly chilling sight had anyone been there to witness it. Outpost Sigma 7. Even the name sounded like a forgotten wound at the edge of explored space. Remote? Absolutely. Notoriously challenging. Infamously so. Rumor had it the station was less a diplomatic post and more a psychological experiment, a place where careers, and sometimes sanities, went to die. It was also, crucially, known for its uncanny ability to either forge unbreakable bonds between the most disparate of souls or, more often, shatter them completely. A calculated risk, then. But what great victory wasn't? He'd seen men crack under less. Could he truly be sure Lyra would be the one to break first? Or was this a trap of his own making? He pushed the fleeting doubt aside. This wasn't just about Lyra, this was about respect. For Earth. For himself. His plan needed to be meticulous, a masterpiece of diplomatic manipulation. No heavy-handed demands. No obvious vendetta. Oh no, this would be artful. He began to draft, his words carefully chosen, weaving a narrative of burgeoning interspecies unity. He envisioned the joint human-Xylosian mission to this very outpost, a powerful symbol, he'd call it, of their two peoples' commitment to understanding, to collaboration even under the most trying circumstances. He'd subtly route the proposal through certain channels in the Lumina Concord, perhaps to officials known for their optimistic, if somewhat naive, belief in diplomatic theater, or even those who, like him, found Ambassador Vane's brand of Xylosian arrogance particularly grating. Let them champion it. It worked almost too well. Within days, the proposal, now lauded as a bold initiative to strengthen diplomatic ties through shared hardship, received the Concord's official, and rather enthusiastic, approval. Phase 1 complete. Now for the direct engagement. He found Lyra in the Citadel's celestial garden, a breathtaking zero-gravity sphere filled with alien flora that shimmered under simulated starlight. She was, of course, alone, observing a pulsating Xylosian moon petal with an air of serene contemplation that Kalen knew was 90% performance. Ambassador Vane, Kalen began, his voice a carefully constructed blend of deference and, was that concern? A moment, if you please. Her iridescent head crests twitched slightly. Annoyance. Good. Commander Vance. To what do I owe this interruption? An opportunity, Ambassador, Kalen said, allowing a hint of feigned excitement into his tone. The Lumina Concord has just approved a rather unique proposal. A joint mission. Human and Xylosian representatives, working side by side at Outpost Sigma 7. A true gesture of unity. He paused, then added, as if an afterthought, it's a challenging assignment, I understand. The conditions are quite rugged, rather unforgiving. There was an incident last cycle, actually, a diplomat from the Florian Ascendancy, quite a delicate species, you know, found it rather too trying. He let his gaze soften with mock sympathy. Of course, Ambassador, your comfort, your well-being, it's paramount. Perhaps this posting is, well, frankly, unsuitable for Xylosian sensibilities. He saw it. The almost imperceptible stiffening of her spine. The slight narrowing of her glacial eyes. Hook, line, and sinker. Are you suggesting, Commander, her voice was a low, dangerous purr, a predator sighting its prey, that a Xylosian ambassador, a representative of a star order that has navigated the void for millennia while your ancestors were still painting on cave walls, would find a primitive outpost challenging? The word primitive was a deliberate echo of her own favored insult. Especially one a Terran soldier deems merely rugged. Oh, the Xylosian pride, so easily pricked. Kalen spread his hands, a picture of earnest apology. Not at all, Ambassador. My sincerest apologies if my concern was misplaced. I merely wish to ensure this truly significant gesture of unity is an unmitigated success. For both our peoples. Lyra Vane's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile that promised pain. Xylos will, of course, participate, Commander. It will be an illuminating experience. Her gaze was pointed. For one of us, at least. She clearly thought she was about to teach him a lesson. Did she have the faintest inkling of the storm she was about to walk into? Doubtful. She swept past him, the subtle, exotic scent of Xylosian star jasmine trailing in her wake. Kalen allowed himself a small, tight, almost invisible smile. The bait was taken. The trap was set. A flicker of something, guilt. No, that was too strong a word, apprehension, perhaps, danced at the edge of his consciousness. Was this taking it too far? He ruthlessly crushed the thought. He remembered her voice, dripping with disdain, dismissing Earth's sacrifices at Cygnus Prime. Tactical expediency, brute force, no. She deserved this. Every uncomfortable, humbling moment of it. This wasn't just a calculated risk, it was a necessary correction. Days later, the Ethelgard Citadel's primary shuttle bay buzzed with activity. The transport vessel designated for the Sigma 7 run, the Stardust Drifter, gleamed under the harsh hangar lights. Lyra arrived, a vision in flowing, iridescent Xylosian silks of deep violet and silver, looking as if she'd stepped directly from an ancient tapestry. She carried a single, ornate data case. Kalen, in his stark, practical Terran fleet duty uniform, watched her approach. The contrast between them was, as always, a chasm. Ready for our cultural exchange, Ambassador? Kalen asked, his voice neutral. Lyra's head crests gave a delicate, dismissive flutter. 3 days, Commander. Let's endeavor to see if your species can maintain a modicum of decorum for that duration. He simply nodded as the ramp lowered. The journey to Outpost Sigma-7 was about to begin, and Kalen couldn't suppress a feeling of grim, tense satisfaction, even as a tiny, nagging voice wondered if this particular gambit might, just might, have consequences even he couldn't foresee. That a stardust drifter sliced through the inky blackness, its journey from the Ethelgard Citadel a silent, tense affair. That tiny, nagging voice of apprehension Kalen had felt at their departure had grown, just a fraction, during the transit. What if this Sigma-7 was more than even he bargained for? He'd read the preliminary reports, of course. Austere. Resource limited. Conducive to focused interaction. Diplomatic euphemisms for a hellhole, most likely. Perfect. The vessel shuddered slightly as it engaged docking clamps with Outpost Sigma-7. The umbilical hissed, locking into place with a metallic clang that echoed through the small passenger cabin. Here we go. The airlock cycled, revealing not a bustling station hub, but a narrow, dimly lit corridor of scuffed gray metal. The air that greeted them was recycled, tinged with the faint, unmistakable odor of overworked ion scrubbers and something else, something vaguely organic and unsettling. Charming, Ambassador Lyra Vane pronounced, her voice utterly flat. Her iridescent head crests, usually held with such regal stillness, seemed to tighten. She surveyed the utilitarian gloom, her expression one of profound distaste. One might have thought she'd been presented with a festering wound rather than a diplomatic posting. Kalen had to physically suppress a smirk. So far, exactly as advertised. Was this a petty satisfaction? Watching her perfect Xylosian composure fray, just a little, at the edges? Maybe. But damn, it felt earned. Outpost Sigma-7 was, to put it mildly, a dump. It clung to the edge of a swirling, malevolent-looking gas giant, a tiny speck of order in a chaotic cosmos. Minimalist was a generous term. Utilitarian, certainly. Designed for hardship. Absolutely. The corridors were tight, the deck plates bore the scars of countless dropped tools and hurried footsteps, and the low ceiling seemed to press down, a constant, subliminal weight. The only soundtrack was the ever-present, monotonous hum of the life support systems, a dull thrum that vibrated in Kalen's teeth. Their escort and reluctant host was Outpost Director Jit, a being resembling a small, bipedal praying mantis, all sharp angles and clicking mandibles. Jit communicated through a series of rapid chirps and whistles, translated, somewhat erratically, by a battered vocalizer unit strapped to its thorax. Welcome, click-were, esteemed dignitaries, to Sigma-7. An honor, hiss-pop, profound it is. Jit's multifaceted eyes blinked rapidly, its antennae twitching. The director seemed genuinely thrilled, or perhaps just terrified, to have such high-ranking officials grace its humble station. Especially an ambassador from the vaunted Xylosian Star Order. One got the distinct impression Jit didn't get many visitors who weren't desperate asteroid miners or on the run from something. The first 24 standard hours passed in an icy silence that was almost a physical presence. Kalen and Lyra were assigned identical, Spartan quarters at opposite ends of the main habitat ring. If you could call them quarters. Each was a cramped metal box containing a narrow bunk that looked designed for maximum discomfort, a tiny fold-down desk, and a single, reinforced viewport offering a dizzying panorama of the roiling gas giant below. Beautiful, in a terrifying, you are an insignificant speck, kind of way. They exchanged only the barest of necessary words, mostly clipped acknowledgments during JIT's overly enthusiastic orientation tour. Lyra's disdain for the primitive conditions, and by extension, for Kalen's very existence, was a palpable force field. Kalen, for his part, feigned indifference, though a grim satisfaction warred with an increasingly uncomfortable awareness of the genuine misery he was inflicting. Was this the path to humility? Or just a deeper well of resentment? He wasn't entirely sure anymore. And that uncertainty, was a new and unwelcome sensation. That evening, JIT, with an air of great ceremony, announced a traditional Sigma 7 welcome feast. Kalen braced himself. The feast turned out to be a small, rather sad-looking collection of what JIT chirpily described as local delicacies, laid out in the outpost's tiny, circular common area. There were bowls of a gray, quivering nutrient paste that smelled faintly of sulfur, some rubbery-looking, bioluminescent fungi, and the piece de resistance, a carafe filled with a viscous, faintly glowing, lavender-hued liquid. Nebula nectar. JIT chirped, its translator buzzing with static. Station specialty. Very, click-whiz-bang, unique. Kalen eyed the nebula nectar with extreme suspicion. The Sigma 7 dossier had included a heavily redacted addendum on indigenous psychoactive flora, and this glowing goo looked suspiciously like it might qualify. He accepted a small measure, taking a polite, tentative sip. It was indescribable. Sweet, then sour, with an unexpected jolt that ran straight up his spine and made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Definitely potent. Lyra, however, saw his hesitation. And in her universe, Xylosian fortitude was paramount. To show anything less, especially in front of this human, was unthinkable. With an air of someone sampling a rare vintage, she accepted a generous pour. Quite invigorating, Director JIT, she declared, her head crests held high, though Kalen caught the barest flicker of surprise in her icy eyes as the nectar hit her palate. JIT, beaming with all 6 of its auxiliary eyes, eagerly offered her a refill. Its translator crackled, "More nectar drink." "Is good. Old station legends say, BZZZT, it peels back all masks. Shows, click, soul deep down. True self within." Lyra arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Primitive superstitions, no doubt. Another charming facet of these lesser civilizations. How tiresome. Yet, the nectar was producing an unusual effect. A pleasant warmth was spreading through her limbs, a subtle loosening of the iron control she perpetually maintained. What possible harm could one more glass do? It wasn't as if a Xylosian of her standing could be affected by some backwater moonshine. She nodded regally. "A delightful tradition, Director." She took the second, larger glass, downing it with a defiant glance at Kalen. He watched her, that flicker of unease intensifying. This nebula nectar, it wasn't just strong. There was something else about it, something almost sentient. The welcome ceremony eventually petered out. JIT, after several more enthusiastic but largely incomprehensible pronouncements about interspecies harmony, finally clicked and whistled its way off to its own tiny sleeping module, leaving Kalen and Lyra alone. The silence in the common area was different now. Still tense, yes, but laced with something new. Something volatile. Lyra stood by the viewport, gazing out at the swirling chaos of the gas giant, though Kalen suspected she wasn't truly seeing it. The lavender glow of the nectar seemed to cling to her, a faint aura in the dim station lights. He noticed her head crests, usually so rigidly controlled, were swaying. Just a little. She turned, her movements a fraction less precise than usual. Her eyes, when they met his, held a strange, unnervingly direct gleam. The usual Arctic frost was muted. Replaced by what? Curiosity. Or something far more dangerous. "Commander Vance," she said, her voice a low, husky drawl he'd never heard from her before. "Are all humans such tedious chaperones? Or is it just you?" Her voice, a low, husky drawl he'd never have associated with the glacial ambassador Lyra Vane, cut through the recycled air of Outpost Sigma-7's common area. "Commander Vance," she'd said, her usually perfect posture just a fraction off kilter, those intricate Xylosian head crests of hers swaying with an almost liquid grace, "are all humans such tedious chaperones? Or is it just you?" Kaelin turned from the viewport, where the chaotic beauty of a crimson and violet gas giant swirled in an endless, silent ballet. He'd been trying to ignore her, trying to let the nebula nectar he'd cautiously sipped earlier settle. Trying, and failing, not to notice the profound effect the potent lavender brew was having on her. "Just admiring the view, Ambassador," he replied, his own voice carefully neutral, though a spark of something he couldn't quite name, amusement. Trepidation flickered within him. "Something you Xylosians, with your flawless star charts and millennia of cosmic ennui, probably take for granted. A verbal spar. Their usual mode of communication. But tonight, something was different. The nectar, it seemed, had sanded down Lyra's sharpest edges, leaving behind a raw, unpredictable surface. She actually laughed. A short, breathy sound that was utterly alien coming from her. "Ennui, Commander. Is that what your limited vocabulary terms profound cosmic understanding? My vocabulary is perfectly adequate to describe Xylosian arrogance, Ambassador." "Arrogance?" She took a step closer, and the faint, sweet and sour scent of the nectar wafted from her. "Or simply an objective assessment of galactic realities?" Then, the shift. So unexpected it was like a microjump into an alternate dimension. Her gaze, usually so dismissive, seemed to focus. Really focus on his face. "For a primitive," she stated, her head tilting with an almost childlike curiosity, "your facial structure exhibits surprising bilateral symmetry." Kaelin blinked. What in the seven hells was that? Was that a Xylosian attempt at a compliment, Ambassador Vane? He asked, genuinely thrown. He'd been braced for an insult, a dismissal, another lecture on Xylosian superiority. Not this. A faint, attractive orange flush, a shade darker than her usual skin tone, crept up her high cheekbones. Was she blushing? Could Xylosians even blush? "Merely an objective scientific observation, Commander," she scoffed, but the denial was weak, unconvincing. Her head crests twitched again, a delicate, fascinating movement. "Your species, rather chaotic genetic expressions do, on rare occasion, produce aesthetically tolerable results." Tolerable results. Right. He should have been offended. He was offended, wasn't he? But the sheer unexpectedness of it, the crack in her icy facade, was too intriguing. The conversation, against all odds and every precedent they'd ever set, began to deepen. Maybe it was the isolation of Sigma-7, a tiny, fragile bubble of life adrift in an overwhelming void. Maybe it was the constant, subliminal thrum of the station's struggling life support. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the damned nebula nectar stripping away layers of carefully constructed diplomatic armor. They found themselves talking, really talking, about the crushing pressures of their respective roles. Lyra spoke of the immense burden of representing a civilization that prided itself on millennia of unflawed perfection, where any deviation was seen as a catastrophic failure. Kalen, in turn, found himself voicing the constant Terran frustration of always being the underdog, the galactic upstarts, forever having to prove their worth, their resilience often mistaken for simple aggression. And beneath it all, an unspoken, shared loneliness. Two solitary figures, light years from home, trapped in a metal can with only each other for company or torment. It was Lyra, her usual Xylosian reserve thoroughly dissolved by now. Had she somehow procured a third glass of that insidious nectar, or was the second one just exceptionally potent? Who shattered the last vestiges of professional decorum? Commander. Kalen, she began, the use of his first name sending a strange shiver down his spine. Her head crests pulsed with a soft, inner luminescence, a Xylosian tell he vaguely recalled reading about, associated with heightened curiosity, or something more intense. Tell me about these human courtship rituals. They seem so inefficient. So driven by chaotic emotion. He stared at her. This was not Ambassador Lyra Vane, the Ice Queen of Xylos. This was someone entirely different. Someone unguarded, unpredictable. And, a treacherous part of his mind admitted, utterly captivating. Human courtship, Ambassador. He tried for a light, teasing tone, but his voice came out rougher than intended. The nectar was definitely humming in his own veins now, blurring edges, dulling the klaxons that should have been screaming in his brain. It's an inefficient process, you're right. Messy. Often illogical. Full of grand gestures and spectacular failures. He gave a wry smile. You'd probably find it appallingly primitive. Perhaps, she conceded, her voice a mere whisper. She took another step, closing the already negligible distance between them. The air in the small common room suddenly felt thick, charged, electric. He could smell the nectar on her breath, a sweet, heady perfume that was doing strange things to his resolve. Or perhaps, Xylosian efficiency has overlooked certain, vital data points. Her hand, those slender, three-fingered Xylosian hands that could manipulate hyper-complex data streams with such grace, lifted. Hesitated. Then, with a startlingly light touch, her fingertips brushed his jawline, tracing its curve. Her skin was cool, but not cold. And the touch, it sent a jolt, a pure, unadulterated shockwave, right through him. Xylosian scientific doctrine, she murmured, her gaze locked on his, her pupils dilated, posits that humans are excessively volatile. Prone to unpredictable emotional surges. Her fingers continued their exploration, featherlight, yet searing. Yet, there is a certain, untamed resonance. A chaotic energy that is not entirely without its appeal. He should pull away. He knew he should. This was insanity. Career-ending, species-scandalizing insanity. But his hand moved, seemingly of its own accord, covering hers, pressing her palm against his skin. Warm human, cool Xylosian. The contact was a revelation. Perhaps, Ambassador, Kalen heard himself say, his voice a husky rasp he barely recognized, it's time for some advanced cross-cultural research. The warning bells in his head had gone from klaxons to a faint, distant ringing. Almost ignorable. Almost. Lyra's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. A smile that was pure, unadulterated, galactic-level trouble. And hotter than any sun he'd ever flown near. Her head crests gave a final, decisive flutter. Indeed, Commander, she purred, her eyes gleaming with a light that was definitely not just the reflection of the crimson nebula outside. For the vital advancement of diplomatic understanding, of course. The universe outside the main viewport of Outpost Sigma 7, with its violent, beautiful swirls of crimson and violet, seemed to pause, holding its breath. She turned then, her movements imbued with a surprising, nectar-fueled grace, and with a silent, almost imperceptible nod, began to walk from the common area towards her own Spartan quarters. Kalen watched her go for a nanosecond, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Then, he followed. The door to her small, metal-walled room hissed softly shut behind them, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden, charged silence of the narrow corridor. Outside, the deep crimson light of the ever-present nebula pulsed, casting long, dancing, distorted shadows down the empty passageway, shadows that seemed to writhe and beckon towards that now closed door. A line had been crossed. A boundary shattered. And in the heart of that isolated, forgotten outpost, under the gaze of a million indifferent stars, neither of them, in that moment, seemed to care one damn bit. The crimson light of the nebula, a silent, bleeding wound across the viewport of Ambassador Lyra Vane's quarters, did little to soften the harsh reality of morning on Outpost Sigma 7. Kalen Vance woke with a jolt, his heart slamming against his ribs. The unfamiliar scent, a faint, metallic tang mixed with something cool and vaguely floral, undoubtedly some Xylosian atmospheric preference, hit him first. Then the scratchy, utilitarian blanket. Then the memory. It crashed over him with the force of a plasma blast. Stars above, what have I done? His meticulously crafted plan for revenge, for teaching the insufferable Ambassador Vane a lesson in humility, it hadn't just gone off the rails. It had catastrophically self-destructed, taking him with it. The nebula nectar. Yes, that had to be it. A potent, unpredictable variable. But was it excuse enough for this? For the ambassador of Xylos, currently stirring beside him. Lyra's iridescent head crests twitched. Her eyes, the color of a frozen sea, fluttered open. For a nanosecond, there was only disorientation. Then, dawning awareness. Followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated Xylosian horror that tightened her orange-hued features into a mask of fury and, was that fear? You, she hissed, the word of Viper's strike. She scrambled back, clutching the thin station-issue bedsheet to her chest as if it were a shield against a barbarian. You, human. Kalen, already swinging his legs over the side of the narrow bunk, felt a flush of his own, shame, anger, confusion, all of it. Ambassador, do not speak to me. Her voice was a low, trembling whisper, far more terrifying than her usual icy pronouncements. This aberration, it never happened. Do you comprehend, Commander? It was a lapse in judgment, Kalen began, scrambling for words, for an excuse, for anything to diffuse the ticking nova in the room. The nebula nectar, it clearly affects different species in unexpected ways. Could this get any more awkward? A mistake, Commander, Lyra cut him off, her voice now laced with a chilling precision, though a faint tremor still betrayed her agitation. A disgusting, primitive, utterly human mistake. An error in chemical and situational calculus that will be rectified by the simple expedient of never, ever, being spoken of again. By either of us. To anyone. Is that crystalline clear? He met her furious, terrified gaze. Crystal. What else could he say? His grand plan for humbling her had imploded, leaving him, here. In this mess. The pact of silence was forged in mutual regret and barely suppressed panic. Professionalism, That would be their watchword for the remaining 2 excruciating days of this forsaken mission. They were colleagues, representing their respective star nations. Nothing more. Absolutely nothing. Kalen retrieved his uniform, which lay in a discarded heap on the cold metal floor, a damning testament to the night's cultural exploration. He dressed in silence, acutely aware of Lyra's gaze burning into his back. He didn't look at her as he let himself out of her quarters. The short walk down the sterile, echoing corridor back to his own identical metal box felt like the longest journey of his life. He felt empty. And a strange, unwelcome pang of disappointment at the finality in her voice. This was so much more complicated than a simple lesson in humility. So much worse. The next day cycle on Outpost Sigma 7 dawned with an atmosphere thicker than the gas giant's lower cloud decks. Lyra began to exhibit symptoms. At first, Kalen tried to ignore it, sticking to their silent agreement. But it became increasingly difficult. During their mandatory joint review of the station's failing atmospheric scrubbers, a task JIT seemed to think would foster interspecies bonding, Lyra's usually vibrant orange skin had taken on a distinct, unhealthy greenish tinge. Waves of nausea clearly washed over her, forcing her to pause, her hand flying to her mouth. Later, while inspecting the equally dilapidated communications array, a sudden dizziness made her sway, her usually steady Xylosian hand gripping a nearby conduit for support. "Are you still feeling the nectar's after effects, Ambassador?" Kalen finally asked, his voice carefully neutral, during a brief respite. He couldn't help it. His plan hadn't included actual physical distress. She shot him a venomous glare. "That vile station brew is indeed potent, Commander," she snapped, her voice brittle. "And these unhygienic conditions would test the fortitude of any civilized being." Her Xylosian pride, it seemed, was still very much intact, even if her stomach wasn't. But Kalen saw the flicker of fear in her eyes before she masked it. This was more than a hangover. He'd seen enough of those to know. He watched her throughout the day, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He remembered fragments from his xenophysiology briefings back at the academy. Xylosians possessed a highly refined, ancient biological system, incredibly efficient but also, in some cases, unexpectedly, reactive to alien biochemicals. Could the nebula nectar, that seemingly innocuous welcome drink, have triggered something more profound, more insidious than simple